I see a lot of colleagues are confirming that they can hear us and they cannot hear us. Different messages. I hope you can hear me. We're gonna start our webinar in a moment. Today we have our colleagues from DCO, Country Business Strategy team in this webinar, as well as our colleagues from UN Women. Mainly our speaker today will be our colleague Akhtar Zazai, who is the head of the procurement unit for the UN Women headquarters in New York and a key contributor to the gender responsive procurement practice note under the high impact common services in the BOSS. We're gonna start our webinar just in a moment as Lars Tushuizen will be joining us to take you through a quick recap of the process and as well as the high impact common services, and then we'll jump directly into the gender responsive procurement service itself. Akhtar will be taking us through key slides on what the gender responsive procurement is, how it can be applied at the country level in a collaborative approach through the business operation strategies, and what kind of support structure is there in case if you need any kind of support and questions and wanted to understand how best you can vet the service providers or the vendors at the country level. So allow me to just another moment while I'll be contacting Lars to see if he can join us. And in the meantime, let me hand over the floor to Akhtar to introduce himself and the team, and then we'll go ahead. Over to you, Akhtar. Can you hear us, Akhtar?
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Amir, for the brief introduction, and hi, everyone. As Samir said, I'm heading the procurement function of UN Women, and I'll be supporting the BOSS colleagues with the gender responsive procurement aspects of the strategy. And I believe we are still waiting for Lars to join to have the full quorum.
I'm here, Akhtar. I'm here.
Hi, Lars. Hi. So over to you, Lars, for the start, and then I'll take over.
Sure.
Before you start, sorry for that. I was just warming up the session. Very warm welcome again to all the colleagues that have joined this webinar today. Our webinar today is in the series of high impact common services within the BOSS, the common services that either brings high cost avoidance opportunity for the UN country teams and operations management teams, or quality improvement. Another aspect of the high impact common services, again, the social impact. So we have been having a series of webinars, and today the focus is on gender responsive procurement. The team here that will be talking to you today will be Lars Tushuizen. Most of you already know Lars. Lars is the chief of the country business strategy branch in the UNDCO. And we have Akhtar Zazai, who I mentioned is the head of the procurement for UN Women headquarters in New York, supported by his colleague Samir Froten, the global lead for the business operations strategy. So I'm going to hand over the floor to Lars to give us a quick overview of the high impact common service and a recap of where we have been so far, and then to Akhtar to explain to us what gender responsive procurement is and what kind of engagements we'll have. Lars, the floor is yours, and Diego is managing the deck.
Thank you, Samir. Colleagues, welcome to the webinar. Seems like we've got around 150 people on the call. I'll give you a bit of an introduction to the high impact common services. Those of you who attended the introductory session might have heard some of the messages, but today we're actually going into detail about one of the particular services, in this case, the gender responsive procurement bit. But as a bit of a background, Many of you will know the business operations strategy and the rollout. I'm sure many have been engaged in the development of the BOS, either in the country or at regional HQ in some kind of function. We're approaching rapidly the point where almost all countries have a BOS in place. We're currently hitting close to 100, I think. And soon, as in Q1 and Q2, we will finish the BOS rollout quite a bit ahead of schedule. What you will see happening after that is that now that we have the strategic frameworks in place, we will start focusing more on individual services that have high impact. And high impact is defined in terms of cost avoidance. So services that really reduce our cost, or services that enhance our quality. And quality is a bit of a broad category. Quality can be, for example, when you talk about procurement, you can talk about the turnaround speeds, how fast procurement is being realized. Also, how well the procurement of commodities or services is meeting the demand of the client. But another element of quality is also the social impact. And this is a narrative, if you wish, that has been emerging quite strong on the BOS. It is a shift in thinking that whereas business operations in general supports program, and through program we realize a social impact at a country level. That is a traditional way of looking at this, and that stays, of course. We support program and therefore contribute to social impact. There's another stream of services that actually could have a much more direct impact on social impact at a country level in terms of different objectives as set by the SDGs. Now, gender responsive procurement is one example of that. It of course targets the gender SDG and contributes to the impact under that SDG area. And as Achta will go into more detail, the principle of the gender responsive procurement is that by channeling some of our procurement volumes towards potential suppliers, etc., that promote gender equality in their setup, and again, Achta will go into details on that, operations can have a very, very direct impact on gender equality. That's not just in gender. We do the same with renewable energy. We're working on disabilities. So different types of services are being pushed forward under the existing BOSes. And that is a switch you will see. As you can see on this slide, these are different examples. We've started pushing the humanitarian booking hub, which looks at travel and medical services. The more the more SDG sensitive social impact related services is the gender responsive procurement and the disability, the green energy. A sustainable cafeteria is a quite advanced way of organizing catering cafeteria in the UN, which also ties to staff well-being. Quite an interesting case. So we'll be starting to provide you an overview of individual services that can be used under the BOS that either reduce cost or have that social impact or that quality impact. These services will have standardized common service packages, as we call them. One of the challenges of the past was that a lot of countries were doing a lot of things, and there was a lot of good work out there. But as a result, a lot of countries were also reinventing the wheel, and at varying quality levels, depending on what skill sets that country had at its disposal. So we saw a wide variety of quality of services being developed, plus a lot of your precious time being spent on things that were actually already out there. So our standardized common services, high impact common services, they will come with a standard document outlining the service, what are the steps to design these services. It's more or less a shelf product, what you can pull off the shelf and you localize it for your country. So it will save you a lot of time that after you went through the whole BOS design, that you then have to go through the design of the individual services. These standardized packages help you with that. It will give you 50–60% of the work already done, developed by experts who know this field. And the remaining work is only for you to localize it and fit it within the context of your country. So we're doing this to help you, save you time, but at the same time, promote services that we know will have a certain impact, being it on cost or quality. So that's the purpose of these webinar series. You will hear different entities speak. So DCO often does not design the services for a very simple reason that UN entities often have the capacity to do this and probably do it even better than we can. They have the specialists in these areas. So today it is with UN Women who worked with us on this gender responsive procurement based on excellent work they already did. The humanitarian booking hub, for example, was with WFP. Any entity can request, if a service is mature and ready to be scaled at a country level, they can request, can we feature in one of these webinars? And we will give the floor to those entities. The UNCTs and the OMTs, you can decide for yourself whether this fits you or not. It's not that we say you must do this. Certain services, we highly recommend it. But the main aim is to give you a sense, okay, what's out there, and if you want to do this, here is a package with which you can work. So that's the objective. Next slide, please, Diego. So I will hand the floor over to Achtar to actually talk about the service rather than me giving you the general background. Diego, please confirm, are we going to go over these statistics? I think we did that last time, so I suggest we go to Achtar and talk about the gender responsive procurement solution itself. Can you confirm, please?
Sure, confirm. Samir also wanted to speak his part first so that Achtar can continue for the rest of the seminar.
Okay. So with that, colleagues, I hope you enjoy this service. We would appreciate your feedback. These are rolling webinar series, so it is very important for us that you tell us, like, listen, is this actually providing you what you need? Do you want to see things differently so we can adjust it so that future webinars can better cater to your needs? So we would appreciate your feedback on the webinar. Zamir, over to you to cover the last slides, and then to Achtar to talk about exact service. Over.
Thanks, Lars. Colleagues, I brought forward the slides for the rollout and way forward of all the high impact common services, particularly the one that we are discussing today, the gender responsive procurement, so that you have a very clear vision of how you can deal with these in your business operations strategies. Can I have the next slide, please? So, colleagues, you'll hear from Achtar very soon on the gender responsive procurement. Our proposal and recommendation from the DCEO is that you try to initiate gender responsive procurement as a collaborative common service in your BOS, and encourage all the UN country teams or all the agencies at the country level to engage in this common service together. You could be much more stronger and much more effective if you lead this common service together as UN. But if there is any agency that might not have the ability to join the common service at the moment, they can still be given a chance to come in later during the process. But as mentioned, it's important for you to look at this as a collective approach rather than an individualized approach for your agencies. Next slide, please. Some of these common services, all of the high impact common services, has been tagged as recommended common services in the BOS online platform. This particular common service and all the other high impact common services that are recommended will come with a particular practice note attached to them, so that your UNCT and your OMT could review this and understand this better. And apart from these webinars, so that you know that what is, let's say, the gender responsive procurement, how do I go about it, what are the key criteria for me to ensure our team are successful in sourcing gender responsive vendors, and that procurement process are inclusive. We will continue to have dedicated webinars depending on the need and the demand on these areas. And obviously, for all of the high impact common services, and in particular for this gender responsive procurement, we have a dedicated expert support, Achtar and his team, sitting there to clarify your questions now and in future as you go through implementation of this common service in your BOS. Next slide, please. So you might have this question that this is good, but I have already completed development of my BOS in the online platform. What do I need to do? In this case, our answer is obvious, that you can initiate the preparation for this, and as soon as your boss is open for review, which is normally in 12 months from the time of the sign-off, you can include this common service formally into your boss for collaboration amongst the countries. But you don't have to wait until then to initiate your efforts. Preliminary work can be done to start paving the way toward having a gender responsive procurement common service in your operations management team. And for the countries that are still developing their BOS, we highly recommend that all the high impact common services are included in their BOS from the very beginning, be it the gender responsive procurement or the humanitarian booking hub services that we presented last week, or all the other ones that are coming up in terms of the disability and inclusion or solar energy systems and all. That we'll look forward to have you in those webinars as well. Next slide, please. So there you go. We start with the gender responsive procurement, and I hand over the floor to Akhtar. Akhtar will make a quick presentation for you, and then we'll open the floor for questions and answers. Over to you, Akhtar.
Thank you, Samir. Thanks, Lars. Hello, everyone, again. We will have a quick presentation and we'll discuss the different aspects of gender responsive procurement, GRP, or as it is called, gender sensitive procurement. And as Samir mentioned, we will have a Q&A session at the end. So we'll get looking at the background of the gender responsive procurement, or GRP in short. The GRP directly underpins the SDG Goal 5, which is achieving gender equality and empowerment of women and girls. And also some aspects of Goal 8, which is decent work and economic growth, that is more related to circular economy, that you will look at it later on. And SDG Goal 12.7, which is sustainable procurement practices. The SDG Goal 12.7 and SDG Goal 12 in overall, when the sustainable procurement practice of 12.7 was to some extent more focus on the environmental aspect, which was more on the greener procurement. But in the recent years, in the last 1 to 3 years, we had the Sustainable Procurement Working Group that was established, within which now we have different task force, and one is on gender responsive procurement. We can't say we have a sustainable procurement if it is not gender responsive. And you can see also in terms of our spends in the UN, close to 12 billion worth of goods and services were procured by UN in 2019. And in the next slide, Lois, next slide, please. We will discuss here what is gender responsive procurement. You can read that for yourself. And today, many states, many governments increasingly use public purchasing to promote a wide range of goals to foster anti-discrimination and enhance equality. And UN is no exception to that. This concept of gender responsive procurement, or using the public procurement to fight the discrimination and the segregation, has been there for decades. There were some studies that in Europe, 40% of those companies, I think that was Germany, who adopted GRP, the implementation, as how successful they were in the implementation, was very minimal. But in terms of the vendor classification, we have women-owned businesses and we have gender-responsive vendors. In terms of women-owned businesses, so far at this stage, there are two categories of that. One is self-proclaimed. The self-proclaimed are the one that they claim that they're women-owned businesses, but they have not gone through an external certification. And the second category is those who have been externally certified as women-owned businesses. The certification of those women-owned businesses is still being discussed at UNWomen Inc. as how to locate it, which entities can really certify a company as a women-owned businesses. And then the gender responsive, when there is another aspects of that, that's a legal entity, not owned by women, but in principle, they promote gender equality and meets local, international labor and human rights standards by having gender responsive teams, the setups and the other, they have policies in place that we will look more in depth into details in the coming slides. Next slide, please. In terms of statistics, this is very interesting. If you look at it in overall, in terms of the number of SMEs or smaller and medium-sized enterprises that are owned by women, and that represents the percentage in the emerging markets, in average, they're around 35% or the SME owned by women, and in average 35% of that are also in emerging market, which accounts to approximately over 220 million women entrepreneurs worldwide who participate in the women ownership. But some studies still shows, and that is we are looking at the last figures here, that they still have access to less than 1% of public procurement. In terms of GDP, 20% of GDP is produced by women-owned small and medium-sized businesses, and global and also procurement itself, then as a function, contributes to 20% of the global GDP. The slides will be shared, and you can read more on this, on the sources that are quoted in every slide. And these are the global pictures. So you look at the number of women-owned businesses that are legally registered, exist in both type of globally and also in the emerging markets where we operate the most. And the contribution of them to the GDP and the important factor of actually the procurement, which is a great opportunity to promote social economy. That's also 20% of the global GDP, but unfortunately, the spends of public procurement is only with women-owned businesses is at around 1%. So we can see already a huge gap here, and how to close the gaps gradually. We will be working on that. And the next slide, please. We'll discuss what are the barriers. So on the left-hand side, on the light blue, you see the barriers that women-owned businesses are faced with. On the right-hand side, on the darker blue or black colors, you would see the barriers or the limitations from our side. So limited, if we look at this effective implementation of GRP-related policies. For the UN, let's focus on the UN. We have some practical guides, some checklists, some suggested evaluation criteria and others, but how much of those have been applied? Who is really actively using those suggested policies or guidelines? Who are benefiting from that? There are limited to no information available, and that is due to the absence of data. We don't have the system or record to trace this information. On the women-owned business side or the supplier vendor side, there are social, cultural, and legal discriminatory norms. That goes by different countries and different contexts that you know for yourself how those two are working. As I mentioned, the application of this gender responsive protocols or policies, in effect, there are policies which are mandatory to be used. Like in procurement, most of you who are involved in procurement, you know that you are supposed to publish a bid globally if it is of certain value and particular commodity or particular nature. But there is nothing mandatory for GRP provisions that you must have an A criteria or B criteria embedded in that solicitation. So it is more voluntarily, and that's where the risk is. So it needs a commitment from each of us, each individual, to really capitalize on those resources that are out there available. And also absence of necessary tools and guidance to some extent for the GRP at our end. We do have some tools, but not good enough. They are in the shelf somewhere, or they are not entirely socialized. And this is what we will be doing in the course of this BOSS program, which is a great bridge to fill this gap, to communicate, socialize all these policies, the guidance, and the tools available. And the knowledge gap that we have among the UN, there will be more webinars of this type, and there will be trainings that we will discuss later on in consultation with BOSS to see how we can proceed with it, how we can have those offerings for everyone. So these are a little bit few highlights on our side. And if you look at the supplier aspect also, they have limited knowledge often about the UN business opportunities. We have UN GEM, we have our own website, but not necessarily the platforms that are viewed or visited by small and medium-sized enterprises, especially women-owned businesses. They also have limitation to access finance and capitals in banking system and others due to their size and their limitation that they have limited access to UN and public contracts. So those all limitations builds up. On their side, they have all these limitations, the discrimination, the segregation between men-owned businesses and women-owned businesses. From our side, we have absence of clear guidance, policies, capacity building initiatives, and the more important thing is the voluntary nature of the GRP so far in the UN. It is left to an individual who is really writing that webinar, the solicitation documents, or the person who approves, if they will be including this, because absence of such criteria is not accompanied or not associated with any other accountability aspect. So that is one of the key here. Next slide, please. So in terms of objectives and benefits, of course, you know that what's the objective of this, and in some of the key benefits is that we further harmonize our work with our organization's strategic objectives. Procurement used to be seen as one of the back office functions. And many of you might know that today it is difficult to secure qualified procurement experts for a job opportunity that you have. What does that mean is that procurement is changing. It is not the procurement of a decade ago in the UN. Procurement is a specialized function, and it is no longer seen as a support function to, it is support function, but not a back office support function, which just works, reacts to the request, but rather they are more strategically positioned through the use of this strategic procurement. Now we can achieve equality in our procurement spend, achieve equality in all different aspects. And procurement should move beyond the cost management. It is often focused more on cost management, but rather we should create economy and social values, and that will be discussed later on how we can create those values, how we can create these economic and social values by creating more jobs. Just to throw an idea, for example, you have a contract and you are having a supplier as a consultancy firm to come and join and work for you, how you can create more economy and create social values and more job for women. To ask them to have the team comprised of women and men, the balancing, the task force in the workforce, in the work power, the team that they're nominating, should be equally between men and women. So the team should be comprised of both genders, as an example. And also this support circular economy is, the studies shows that women-owned businesses, they reinvest back in their business. They reinvest their profits into the local communities. And that has been proven by many different studies, like women-owned businesses, when they have access to bigger contracts, you can see that the company is growing. They reinvest in the local economies. They create a better environment for their children, for their kids in terms of their studies. I'm not saying by any means that men are not doing that. That study proven shows that women-owned businesses, a woman who is the owner of the business, will reinvest more into local economy compared to the opposites. So by doing all this, we will be narrowing this social and economic gender gaps, which is, of course, during this pandemic, the COVID-19 challenges, it has been broadened. I was listening to a speech from the ILO colleagues last night. It was aired in international media that the number of jobs that have been lost during this pandemic, there was a highest percentage and impact on women. So how we, by applying this GRP, how we can reduce that gap and how we can support women on businesses and women. Next slide, please, and we'll go more into details of this. That in application of the GRP, the best value for money, yes, we have procurement principles, which for all the UN agencies are coming from the UNFRR, and then we have our own touch and twist on that. But the best value for money really measures how well goods or service allow your organization to meet its social, environmental, and overall strategic objectives. And here, please remember that we are all working in support of this SDG goals. And I mentioned few, in particular goal number 5, and also goal number 8, which is decent work and economic growth, and 12.7. When I speak about goal number 8, decent work and economic growth, is talking about supply chain, where you will not allow your suppliers, based on the general terms and conditions and supplier code of conduct that we changed, that suppliers will no longer be allowed to discriminate against women in terms of pay, in terms of promotion, in terms of training opportunities. So all of that are your strategic objectives for every organization, because all UN works in support or underpins in our day-to-day work the SDG goals. So how we do that, the identification of women-owned and gender-responsive vendors, the supplier database, is a key to take stock of that. And this is discussed later on. At the planning stage, I would encourage you in your offices to move one stage beyond the procurement planning, at the project initiation stage, at the project inception stage, as how we can influence those planning, how we can discuss with our program colleagues and others on consideration of gender responsive procurement. In the definition requirement, for example, we had a case a while ago that vest and helmets, security vest and helmets, not all of them were very gender friendly. And in certain countries, there were challenges in terms of the weight and the size. So when you define it, or if you are procuring services, how you can include this gender aspect in your term of reference or in the qualification criteria, we will look at that in a minute, and also in the eligibility and evaluation criteria. We'll move to the next slide. So some of the evaluation criteria and approach in the solicitation documents, the practical ones. So use of gender responsive criteria, if you're looking at suppliers, you can see regardless of their own ownership, if they have implemented policies that promote gender equality, you can assign few scores to that, and they will suppliers will by seeing this, if they don't have such policies moving forward, they will think about this. When I was presenting in one of our internal training, someone raised their hand and said, in their particular country, and the colleague shared the experience, said, if a company is going bankrupt nowadays in the country, in that particular country, they change the ownership to their spouse name, to their wife, with the hope that they will get more businesses. And yes, it could be also seen at somehow like this is this tokenism, but in the previous slide, we said what is really the definition of a women-owned businesses. But my response was, I said, if that in this country and that particular supplier start thinking that changing the ownership might bring them more business, that's already a dialogue that we wanted to start. And this was what was missing for a long time. So maybe you have done something good in your country. Maybe you have more criteria that promotes gender responsive procurement in your procurement practices. And that's why the suppliers start thinking to change the ownership, or this or other suppliers. So a discussion must start. Not always a pleasant discussion, it could be questioned, but we have to start somewhere. So have implemented policies that promote gender equality. Gender balance in project team. This could be, as I mentioned earlier, that if they're sending 10 people for a consultancy services, how is the gender balance in the team? Often you can ask very fairly that the gender balance should be maintained, and this is in support of your strategic objectives, the SDG Goal 5, Goal 8, 12.7, and your own business strategy or strategic plan or strategic goal of your organization. You can also look at the nature of subcontractors. You will look for yourself in your organization, how and what are the possibilities, what can you do, to what extent. And along these lines, you will be also receiving a guide from your executive offices in the coming weeks, hopefully, on this SP, our Sustainable Procurement Indicators. The gender responsive procurement is part of that, which will be implemented or rolled out to all UN agencies. And you can also look at if the supplier is willing to be signatory to women empowerment principles. So these are the different criteria that you can assign scores to, or in a way to give preferences to suppliers who are more gender responsive. For some other type of procurements, like when you don't have technical evaluation, when you don't have scoring method, you can use women ownership as a tiebreaker. We will discuss this in more details. I'm not sure how much time we have now because we will have 10-15 minutes for question and answers. But if you receive identical bids with the same price, your technical requirements are met, the product meets your requirements, and you have women and men-owned businesses, the bids are identical. At UN Women, we have this written award criteria in our solicitation documents that we will be able to award the contract to the women-owned businesses, and you can negotiate at your end in your office that this is in support of your contribution to the strategic objective and the SDGs. That will be, there is no question to say how do you remain fair. How you remain fair is that the first question I would pose is, have you received equality in your procurement spend? If you look at your procurement spend, did you really spend 50% with women-owned businesses and 50% with men-owned businesses? If not, then there is a question of equality and fairness in terms of our spend as well, which we'll be discussing in the next slides. And when you have limited bids, this is we encourage the UN Women offices, and also through BOSS now we we would like to share this experience with others, that where feasible, where you have enough suppliers, women-owned businesses, and you have a limited type of competition, I use as example for and request for quotation, or let's say micro purchasing or shopping, which is for some agencies or most of agencies are under 5,000. In some agencies you are supposed to invite 3 suppliers, in some others it is 5 suppliers or vendors to compete. If you can find that pool of vendors, the 3 or 5 women-owned businesses to invite them, or at least a bigger percentage of the out of 5, if you invite 3 women-owned businesses, hopefully you're already contributing to increase the spend with women-owned businesses, increase the share of women-owned businesses in your procurement spends. These are like practical steps and measures you can take to increase your spend with women-owned businesses moving forward. And again, justified, I know I have come across of this question, how you would remain fair? How do you justify it as an effective competition? Again, I said there could be different aspects that could be looked at and discussed. And then in terms of that effectiveness, fairness, you can reason that with the SDG goals, with your overall commitment to the equality in your procurement spend and in your work. Next slide, please.
Akhtar, just to give you a heads up on the time, I think we have literally 2 or 3 more minutes for the presentation, and then we'll open the floor to colleagues for questions. There is plenty of questions shared in the chat box as well, and the PowerPoint will anyway share with the team for detailed read up as well, just to give you a hand.
Sure, I'll make sure that I wrap it up in the next 2-3 minutes. So again, few basic steps as a summary, the best practices, stock take of women-owned businesses at your country level. Integrate GRP at the planning stage. Share the business opportunities in different platforms where you can reach women-owned businesses. Continuously look for women-owned businesses. Once you take stock, don't just live with that for the next year. Every month, other month, look for new suppliers. Markets are changing, new players are coming to the market. Have a list of women-owned vendors for common sectors and for common commodities. Especially when it comes to the limited competition. So in terms of technical requirements, the gender responsive evaluation criteria, and all of that I have discussed, we went through that briefly. Talk to your colleagues in the program section, program team or units, and other teams within your country, within your office, to come up with strategies for targeting women-owned businesses, how and what can be done. Work can be done at OMT levels in different ways to share the practices, have joint procurement, come together and agree and share your vendors list. Next slide, please. And this will be perhaps the last slide. This is just to give you an overview what to look forward for. The gender responsive procurement task is something that is chaired by UN Women. I'm chairing that. It is comprised of a number of UN agencies. Also, we have World Bank, we have IMF, we have OECD, and they are closely working in many ways that we try to link the two. And this task force will also benefit from your inputs, from the BOSS good practices. And we are going to discuss with colleagues in the docu that how we can adapt some of the BOSS products for the task force, and vis-a-vis how it can be two-way traffics. In terms of UN agencies, hopefully will be expected to report on spend with women vendors. The UN registration portal has been amended. As you know now, when supplier register in the UNGM, they are expected to classify if they are women-owned business or not. It was step 1. The UN Supplier Code of Conduct was amended for the first time. this is not UNWomen supplier code of conduct, it's the UN that we all UN agencies use that supplier code of conduct. And that was the language about gender responsiveness or anti-discrimination was incorporated, which supplier will no longer be able to discriminate against women-owned businesses. It will ensure a clean supply chain. On the GRP, we also have amended the procurement practitioner handbook, the main procurement manual. So you can see some references to GRP, and there are more tools and resources available under those reference links. And there will be, hopefully, the goal is within the coming months, within 2021, without any promise, in consultation with DOCO, if you will have an online GRP certification for UN, and also that will be offered for other public and private sectors. We are looking into different aspects of how this course will be designed, and you can see a seven-step action plan, and that was the output of the task force, GRP task force, item 1 that I mentioned. There was a survey conducted, many UN agencies responded to that, and the step 2 to 7 will be, you can see the different timelines for that. And most of those products that will come out of the GRP task force will be socialized in the BOSS context. With this, I will stop here and I will hand over back to Zamir to facilitate the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Akhtar, for the great presentation. I see we have a lot of questions coming up in the chat box from our colleagues all over the world. I think the main focus of the questions, Akhtar, if I summarize two major questions for you, is that one is around the engagement of the interagency in gender responsive procurement, maybe at the higher level, at the level of the high level committee of management, procurement task team. What is basically the engagement there? Is gender responsive procurement accepted by all the agencies for rollout through their country offices? That's one question. And another main question that has been coming up in the chat box is on the evaluation criteria for gender responsive procurement in the tender documents. How do you see that from an interagency perspective? Does it have to be consulted with each and every agency by itself, or it's safe to say that inclusion of gender responsive vendor criteria would be one of the best practices that you could recommend to the team as a way forward for all the agencies? And the third question, if I would summarize from all the good questions that are coming out there, is how do you suggest the best method of sourcing suppliers and vendors at the country level? How can OMTs be stronger and more effective in terms of sourcing suppliers at the country level that are gender responsive suppliers? Do you suggest that they should have gender responsive forums or vendor conferences where your team could also support them in clarifying what is the criteria that we're looking in this kind of engagement and so on? So I'm gonna stop here with those three questions for Akhtar to clarify, and then we will respond to the rest of the questions, colleagues, in the chat right after the webinar, in case if you couldn't cover them. And before I hand over to Akhtar to respond on those three questions, colleagues, Diego Luis has shared with you 3 questions survey. If you would mind, if you wouldn't mind, if you could click on that survey and complete that as well for us as you go through the webinar, that would be helpful for us to further enhance these high impact services webinars for you. So with that, Akhtar, back to you.
Thank you, Zamir. Thanks, colleagues, for the great questions. Can we go back to the last slides with the 7 steps action plan? Yes, thank you, here. So in terms of a response to the question first, the acceptance of GRP at the interagency level or HLCM, The item 1, that the task force that I mentioned, this is formed under the Sustainable Procurement Working Group, which operates under the High-Level Committee on Management for UN. So what is that for colleagues who don't know that the procurement network works under HLCM? We meet, the head of procurement of UN agencies meet twice a year. And that's where these initiatives or collaboration on procurement across the UN agencies are discussed. So they have endorsed, all agencies, all the UN agencies who are taking part in the HLCM procurement network has endorsed this task force to operate under the Sustainable Procurement Working Group. And the products that you see, the 7-step action plan or the 7 products, they have all will go through this HLCM network validation and endorsement. And you will be receiving the products through both and also through your individual agencies. So yes, there is a great deal of collaboration on these issues, and HLCM is really looking forward into the new products that are coming out. As I said, a guide on the SP indicator is already being socialized at HLCM level, and hopefully in the coming months, weeks, you will have access to that guide that will help you with this one. On the GRP evaluation criteria, how, if agencies should cross-check with each other or they can choose for themselves what's the right criteria to use. Absolutely, all avenues are open, all offers are on the table, and we will be sharing. Actually, we can share already through BOSS, but also through that guide on the SP indicators. You will receive some suggested criteria similar to what you have seen in this presentation. Criteria when it is a solicitation process that could be scored, that you can assign score to, or otherwise how you can influence or promote gender responsiveness in a procurement practice. So there is no one-size-fits-all answers, but the good thing is to have these interactions at the OMT level, share what have you done, the good practices with others, and benefit from this generic evaluation criteria and guides that we will be sharing going forward. And how do we suggest the best practice at the country level to attract more vendors, women-owned businesses? As Zamir alluded to that, absolutely. Seminars, local seminars, debriefing of suppliers. These are brilliant ways of doing this, promoting gender responsive procurement. At the same time, have some, through your program colleagues, have programmatic intervention. For us, we do have collaboration between program and procurement, but at the same time, we do also have separate interventions where we see that it might not be entirely for procurement to get involved and train a particular group of suppliers without an open invitation for everyone to be trained. Then that's where our programmatic intervention kicks in, and our program colleagues comes, and then they have their seminars, they invite companies, but at the country levels, certainly the seminars, local seminars for women-owned businesses with an open invitation, and also having suppliers to other suppliers could be, it could be open to other suppliers as well. So those seminars, local capacity buildings, debriefings at the country level, sharing good practice across the agencies will be the key to the success of GRP at the local level. Over. Any other questions, Amir, that you want me to answer?
Thank you, Akhtar. I think we have a number of other questions in the chat box as well that I suggest that Akhtar and the team could respond to them after the webinar is concluded. At this moment, before we close the session in the last 3 or 4 minutes, let me open the floor to any colleague who might want to raise a question that might have not been covered in the general Q&A that we just shared. So colleagues, if you have a very particular question that you want to raise to Akhtar and the team, please raise your hand in the Teams so that we could open the floor for you.
We have Charles.
I see Charles, and then I see Murad. So Charles first, and then Murad, and then we'll give the opportunity to Akhtar to respond to these questions. Charles, you're still mute, but the floor is yours.
Thank you, Akhtar, for this initiative, for the good presentation. There are many things we really need to look around. One is globally, and also especially in the third world countries where program countries are. Women capacity needs to be done. We know the UN Women is our sister organizations, and we need really to empower women. That is a global thing that all of us, the stakeholders, have to see to work towards that. But however, there are a few things we can begin as a startup on specific products, but things like school uniforms, mosquito nets.
Thank you, Charles. If I may jump in, if you can limit your question to 1 minute, so others can also have an opportunity.
Let us discuss, because this is something that is something very important. We need to really look at whether we'll go for it. It's not a question of limiting. Get our perspective, and then we look, and also these are the specifics, that we can do to empower. This is the product ABCD, and people are very sensitive when you give bidding, and in the process, people are bidded, and you give a specific criteria because this is a female business lady you give to. Sometimes the connotation and it is interpreted very, very wrongly, sometimes can even lead to a risk. Even when we do the transparent process in some contexts, there are complaints that, transparent, there is no transparency, you have selected this because this is so-and-so from such a clan, it doesn't have representation, a lot of things. If we are not careful, we are opening a Pandora box, which will jeopardize even integrity of colleagues, and it can create a serious thing. So we really need to look in the wider dimension. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Absolutely. In response to that very briefly, if I may, Samir, what we need to do is to be careful not to end up with the Pandora box, as you classified it, is to have the award and evaluation criteria clearly stated in the solicitation. So that will prevent the risk of running into this type of dilemmas, because in principle, we can't change an award criteria after the solicitation is concluded or after the deadline. Those are basic principles. But also we cannot come up with an award principle or criteria after the deadline, say, because now I see that I have less spend with women-owned businesses, I want to award criteria to this. So whatever is the way forward, the next step based on the appetite of the organization, that you want to award the contract to women-owned businesses because of ABC, that ABC must be listed in the solicitation documents. That would be one of my suggestions. Any other question you want to pick up, Samir?
Yes, we're slightly going over time now. So Akhtar, I would suggest that we revert back to colleagues in this chat box, as well as in the business operations Yammer group with a Q&A of all these questions were raised with an FAQ. Sorry, we will share with an FAQ with you based on all the questions that have been shared in the chat box, and that will be provided to you as we go. Unfortunately, we are running over time now, and will not take any other question at the moment. Thank you very much to Akhtar and colleagues, and also a quick reminder to the colleagues that are interested in Disability and Inclusion Common Service, which is another high impact service under the BOSS. We have a webinar coming up on this on Wednesday, January 27th, which is tomorrow at 7 a.m. New York time. We look forward to see you in this webinar as well, which mainly focuses on how to make our offices physically and digitally, as well as in terms of recruitment and engagement, inclusive, particularly for people with disabilities. So that we look forward to have you in that particular webinar and the ones that are coming up until the end of the month. Thank you very much to Akhtar, to colleagues that have joined us in this session. With the limitation of time, we cannot go any further today, but we promise to come back to you with a published FAQ and a recorded session of this webinar, as well as the presentation. Do remember that the team here, Akhtar and the team, will still be available to support when you have any specific question for your gender responsive bed at your country level and your OMPs, and do feel free to reach out to us.
Thank you. Thanks, Zamir, colleagues, and thanks Lars and Zamir and Lois for the great work, and everyone else for giving us this opportunity to speak to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All the best, colleagues. This webinar is over.